welcome to the Fearlessly Podcast. I'm Mike.
And this is Orlando, and we're on episode 94.
Yeah, and this is an awesome episode because we are doing our level up review. Woo woo. Yeah.
Split the difference.
Never split the difference.
Never
You can't split the difference. You failed already.
What a fail. I already lost, right? If you're splitting the difference in this book, you're losing.
Lesson number 1, don't split the difference.
I know, but I got to tell you, this book, I love all the books we've read. Some I love more than others.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's kind of like, it's different people you love different. You know what I mean? Like You love your spouse, like the utmost, right? And then there's certain relatives you love more than others, right?
Yeah, for sure.
There's some is like the uncle that you love, but you just love.
They're good to have around a little bit just for one-off conversations, but then there's somebody you can go a little deeper with. Yeah.
So that's kind of how I treat our books.
Yeah.
I think our books, because I think we both know which one's the uncle, which we're not going to share.
No,
or it could be the aunt.
Yeah.
We don't discriminate against different genders or relatives.
Yeah, no, that's true. So, but I think this one's good. One of the reasons why, in fact, it's so good that we've decided we're probably going to take it a little bit slower on this one because there's so many great strategies. We really want to kind of flesh them out, talk about some of the stories that he talks about in here, and then go through how it'll apply to reselling and then beyond just reselling, because one of the big claims that this is making, and I think it's really good, and we'll talk about it when we get there, but it's just the idea that all of life is negotiating. And so this book is titled Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as if your life depended on it, by Chris Voss. And I think that's a great title. I mean, this idea that like when we negotiate, and oftentimes in reselling, we think of negotiating as just as like a bargaining for a price, but there's so much more involved in communications and just relationships that you're building where negotiating comes in. So I'm really excited about this one.
No, I agree. And of all the books, listen to all our level up reviews. Yeah. But if there's one I truly recommend, not just because, you end up having to buy the hardcover. Well, you don't have to. You can get the Kindle, but it's the same price. I don't like that.
Was it the same price?
It was like 18 something for the Kindle and it's $25. And the paperback, there was no Prime. So
yeah,
you were kind of stuck. But this is a book I strongly recommend you read.
Yeah.
Right? The other books, they're good to read. They are. I recommend read all of them. But this one, definitely a must read.
Yeah, absolutely. And this came out in 2016, so it's relatively recent. And one of the things I like about, you can kind of see a shift in, I guess what you would say like the self-help books are, because in the past it was just like the guru who they were famous for teaching strategies, but their expertise, like maybe they had some experience in business or marketing or something, but it was almost just all like, I felt like really easy to digest stuff. Whereas now I feel like a lot of the books that are coming out that are reaching those top levels they provide both the practical, like how the everyday person can use this, how it applies, how a businessman can use it, and that kind of stuff. But it's also coming from somebody with like really, really unique experience in life that's like, they add that to the book. So like, for instance, Jocko Willink has the, the extreme ownership, and he was a Navy SEAL. And so you're getting stories of things that it's like, how does this relate? How does this war? Even what we read with the Make Your Bed, right? You get an admiral who is a Navy SEAL, and you're talking about like things. It's like, how does this crazy thing that's happening in Iraq or Afghanistan, or how does that relate to everyday life? But then it shows that it does, and oftentimes it's the extremes that people go to in life, and it's things like war or things like the really intense things that bring out the aspects of humanity that we deal with on an everyday basis, but you don't really notice because it's not elevated to that level.
Correct. And what's awesome is all these books, especially the one we're going to read today, it just, again, it reiterates the fact that we're all human, right? So whether you're on a counter-terrorism team, stopping a multi-level, bomb that's going to go off, or you're negotiating with your kids to go to bed, the same elements apply, which was kind of mind-blowing, but I knew that.
Yeah.
But Chris Voss does a great job of breaking that down. So why don't we get into the book?
Let's do it. All right.
So much.
Yeah. So Chris Voss is, without going into all the detail of his background, but just going to give you an idea, he starts the book by saying for the last 2 decades, he's been on the FBI negotiating team, dealing with terrorists, dealing with kidnappings, and trying to negotiate hostage releases, these really, really high intense pressure issues. And then the book starts off with this kind of interesting thing. And I wasn't 100% sure where it was going.
Wait, but before we start, let's just talk about how this book starts.
That's what I was doing.
No, but I wanted to take a step backwards. There's no prelude. There's no intro. There's no acknowledgement. It's like, boom, chapter 1.
Yeah.
Which to me speaks tons of value.
Yeah.
Right? No nonsense. Like, we're getting to the truth ASAP.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to share. Is that what you wanted to share?
No, yeah, that's good. That's true.
Okay, because I was like, you know how you get a book and you're like, okay, I can skip this
you got
page.
the acknowledgement, the introduction,
all this.
And another forward, and
Yeah. And I opened it, I'm like, oh, chapter 1.
It starts. Yeah.
Let's start. All right, go ahead. Sorry. I just need to interject on that one.
No, that's good. So, and in fact, the way he starts too is it's a good hook. It's one of the things that gets the reader like really thinking about it. And he talks about all of the experience that he's had in negotiating hostages. But then it says this. He goes, but I've never experienced a hostage situation so intense, so personal. We've got your son, Voss. Give us $1 million or he dies. Pause, blink, mindfully urge the heart rate back to normal. Right. So it's like, wait, what's going on here? And it says, you see the people across the table, my negotiating counterparts were Harvard Law School negotiating professors. Right. And so it's like, whoa, what
went down?
Yeah, we call this in the literary world in media res, like you're starting in the middle of action. And it's like, as soon as he sits down, it's like, we've got your son, you owe us $1 million, like give us $1 million. And you kind of assume like, okay, is this like a real thing? And then when he says, the first thing I thought in my mind when he says these were Harvard professors, I was thinking, okay, so maybe this was like negotiating, like getting his son into college or what. But then the story that gets told is even more interesting because there's this interesting dichotomy that's presented here of real life experience and knowledge in the field of negotiating versus kind of the intellectual theories behind negotiating. And these two kind of clash right here in the first chapter when he, as an experienced negotiator, is invited to a program and invited to talk to these Harvard professors who that's what they teach is how to negotiate, understanding human psychology and understanding all of those things. And the initial thing was he was like flabbergasted. He wasn't expecting this to happen right away.
Did that surprise you a little bit that there was a school of negotiation? Like, was that a known thing for you?
I mean, I didn't know that going into it, but I wasn't super surprised, given that it makes sense that if you've got these types of jobs, I mean, you think of FBI, you think of, every police department is going to have people who need to understand criminal psychology. They need to understand these different elements. And so it would make sense that prestigious schools would have programs that would be leading the best and brightest into those fields.
Okay, so it didn't, I was kind of like, it didn't surprise me, but it always is a reminder of how much we don't know.
That's true.
Right? In the sense that I remember finishing my undergrad and then I went to my master's and I kind of thought your master's program was you just do a lot of work to get a degree. And then you jump into a master's program. Those of you who have done your master's or even if you've gone to college, you realize, at least I did, I realized how much of an idiot I was. And Socrates talks about that, how you get to a place where you think you know, and then you reach another level of knowledge, and then you really recognize how absent your extensive knowledge base is.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to that Dunning-Kruger effect. I think that's how it's pronounced, but the almost this bell curve of when people, but it's like an inverse bell curve. If you were to say like the amount of experience on the bottom, and then along the horizontal line is how much knowledge the person thinks they have. So like when somebody first starts something, they often feel like they're very experienced. And then as they get more and more and more experienced, what they would rate themselves, it goes less and less because they realize how much they don't know. And it isn't until you get to like the furthest levels that you start to realize, like, okay, now I'm starting to know again. Right. So people who are experienced like 20 years in a field will rate themselves about the same knowledge in that field as people starting off like 1 year in that field.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Which is kind of obnoxious to think that we can be so proud, to think like, I know all this stuff. But yeah, it's true. And he kind of talks about that. And I think what's funny is he immediately stumps them. Right. Like, and I think this is the perfect example. Like they know now on an intellectual level how negotiation works. They know on an intellectual level, like how
textbook. They know textbook.
They know the textbook. And he doesn't say that they're wrong. Like, he does mention like he's able to out defeat them and they work together and he pulls good things from them. But he simply says like, we've got your son. And he uses this really simple technique. And the first technique he uses is he just asks open-ended questions. So the first one was,
I'm looking at Mike's book. We highlight the same things.
Yeah, it's pretty much
like pretty close.
We always do. I think our minds are pretty locked on how we read.
I just think it's kind of interesting. It's kind of like our interview of Primetime Treasure Hunter.
Oh yeah, if you haven't watched that, man, that was like a weird
that
game show thing.
Maybe that's why the podcast works.
I guess
or
so.
at least kind of works. All right, what are you gonna say?
So it says this. I'm sorry, Robert. How do I even know he's alive? I said using an apology and his first name, seeding more warmth into the interaction in order to complicate his gambit to bulldoze me. And then it says this. I was employing what had become one of the FBI's most potent negotiating tools, the open-ended question. Is that something you ever use when you're doing negotiate?
Okay.
And so how?
So this takes me back to a couple of things. So back in the day, you'd watch these cop shows or these movies, right? And it's always like good cop, bad cop, right? And it's just like, you better tell us or you're gonna go, to the clink or whatever, and it's super intense. Never goes like that, right? And that was like 80s, 90s shows and movies. And then you watch like in the 2000s, it's kind of nuanced. I don't know. There's that show, The Negotiator, that was on TNT, and there's that movie of Kevin Spacey and Samuel L. Jackson that came out, I think late 90s. Forget what that was called. Anyways, on all those, there's more of this, more of the open-ended. And anyways, we'll talk about this because he later talks about the history of the FBI and how they change negotiations. But you kind of see that. And so I trace that too because, and again, I was never in law enforcement, but I had my short stint in loss prevention. And I remember one of the first things we were taught there's two things we were taught. One was the person has to feel that you know everything before you ever walk into the room. They have to have this feeling that all they're doing is just verifying what you already know. So you have to play that game pretty well. The other one was that you had to make them believe you were on their team, that you understood why they were doing what they were doing, that, hey, I'm with you. You're going through tough times. We just want to help you out. We want to make things easier, blah, blah, blah. So, so the question would be like, it wouldn't start off with like, hey, why'd you steal this money? Right? It would start with, so tell me, what's going on? Like, what's been happening? And it's kind of and we'll talk about this later, tactical empathy. I feel like we're jumping all over the place.
Yeah.
I'm jumping all over the place, but there's so much good stuff. But when he talks about seeding more warmth into the interaction in order to complicate his gambit to bulldoze me. It's very true in every situation, whether you're at a garage sale, right? You're about to haggle with someone, whether you're trying to, make a deal with a wholesaler, whatever it is, people have their walls up, right? Because automatically everyone knows you're trying to break that wall, right? To get that better deal, right? And it's the same thing here. So I related to this because I've been in this scenario where somebody had given me an ultimatum, and my personality is not to automatically ask a question, is I put a wall up. They end up nowhere. So if I was Chris Voss here, and this was the real scenario, I'd be in a mess.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's what you were asking, but
no, that's good. And I think too, like he makes the point of like, even his tone when he's saying this, like he had to like, even though he knew this was a practice negotiation, he still's got to fill in the hot seat. Like I just had an observation the other day at school, and then you get asked like, how do you think it went? Right.
The administrator came in and watched you teach.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, and then afterwards they asked me that question, and like in those moments, you kind of have to calm yourself down and like think clearly, because it's easy to like, see into things that you don't, necessarily need to. And part of what he says is like, when you respond or you ask these open-ended questions, to ask them in a tone of voice that kind of de-escalates an issue. Open-ended questions are a double-edged sword. They can do that, or they can put up more walls, right? I remember my wife and I love our relationship. We have like, I feel like an atypical marriage. Like we don't fight very much. We don't have major issues. Like it's an amazing relationship. But one of the things when we first got married that we worked on, and she'll talk about it too, but she would ask questions instead of just telling me like, hey, can you clean up, or please clean up the mess you made? The question she would ask is there a reason you left that on the counter? And like that always got under my skin, because it was like,
just the way, but notice the way you said it too.
Yeah.
Right. It wasn't just the question, it's the inflection.
The inflection. Yeah. And that's what I mean is, so you can ask the open-ended question and it can go both ways. And I try and use this with my students a lot. Like if I notice my students are off task, they're not doing something right, or if they've done something really wrong, and I pull them up to the front of the room, and I ask them a question. Like, I'm trying to figure it out, what's going on, instead of just yelling at them and saying like, hey, you're not doing your work, you need to do your work, I try to be calm and nice and say like, hey, so what are you working on? And is there a reason you're doing that instead of doing this other thing? And are you trying your best? And like asking these questions where instead of just saying you're not doing what you're supposed to do, is like, are you really doing your best in the class? And then you force them. And I like what he says here. He says,
can I jump in? I think I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, go for it.
So there's a motive behind the question. It's not just to kind of bring that wall down. It's more than that, right? He says, if you go down to page 3 at the very bottom, after he talks about why his group is called the Black Swan Group,
Yep.
He says it buys you time. That's one, right? So the onus is on that individual to figure things out as you're trying to be 2 steps ahead.
Uh-huh.
Then he says it gives your counterpart the illusion of control.
Yep.
Right? Key, illusion of control. They are the one with the answers and power after all. That's the illusion.
Yep. And it says this too. It says queries that the other side can respond to, but that have no fixed answer, right? Like don't give them the opportunity to do a yes and no, right? Because if you offer a yes or no, you're in trouble, right? Because then they're just going to say the no, and then you're stuck having to respond again. But if you give them an open-ended question where there's not a yes or no, and they have to think more deeply, like, what could you do to do better on this project, right? Like a question I might ask a student. So instead of them just being able to say yes or no, it's like they now have to think like, well, I guess I could be doing this. And it's like, well, what's keeping you from doing that, right? Like, and so like you force them to actually reflect and think, and then it buys you time to like process. It forces them to think about it, reflect on their own situations. And then in a case like this, it actually is serving to frustrate the other person, right? Which is what he's wanting to do. Like he wants to frustrate the person he's negotiating with in this instance, because it takes the power away from them, right? Like even we talked about like with like the bullies, right? Like when you could take that power away from them and now they're solving your problem. Like how do you want me to come up with this $1 million? Right. And it's like, well, you figure it out. Like, well, is there like, I mean, if I don't know that my kid's alive, how can I figure it out? Right? Like what should I do? And you're making them try to figure it out and it frustrates them.
Now, we'll talk about this later in the book, but he does talk about your different voices, right? So you have to play to the right voice, right? Because if you ask it a certain way and open in the question, it can seem like we said earlier, like it got under your skin, right? That it can do that. If you ask it another way, it can be seen as not being serious. If you ask it another way, it could just blow everything up. So we'll talk about that. But key thing to remember from what Chris Voss is saying is that open-ended questions is one of the easiest ways to slow things down and to get to a place where the power is no longer on that individual.
Yep. And then when he's reflecting on this too, because he even had to ask like, how does this relate to the real world? And he makes this comment that says, it turned out that our approach, talking about the FBI, to negotiation held the keys to unlock profitable human interactions in every domain and in every interaction and every relationship in life. This book is how it works.
Boom.
Yeah.
Thesis of the book.
That's a big claim, right? Like that's what it's going to do.
The 10X claim. 10X will fix everything. Remember?
Yeah. But I mean, if we
this is a little different.
A little different for sure.
A lot different.
All right. So then that leads to the part where now he wonders, like, is this just a fluke? And so now he actually takes a class with what he says are some of the nation's best and brightest who've gone through programs and schoolings on this. And he kind of ended up being a negotiator. He didn't go through schooling programs to get there. So now he's in a room with all of these professional, basically academic elites who've learned this.
Let's rest there a little bit though. So this is something that I think we all need to understand context on, whether it's in reselling, whatever we're doing, is that sometimes we believe that people are at our same level. I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe it's just me. But, we approach certain people in life and we think they're not any different than we are. And I would say even right now in our current society, it's very clear that everyone is always equal at all times, right? Whether it's in intellect, whether it's in what they know, right? Everybody has the same equal access to knowledge. So we make assumptions that everybody knows the same. I don't know if that makes sense. So I'm looking at this and hopefully I can come clear of what I'm saying here. He says filled with brilliant Harvard students getting law and business degrees and hotshot students from other top Boston universities like the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, that's MIT, and Tufts. And I'm looking at this and going, okay, so let's say you're an individual that didn't go to any schooling, right? And you're a pretty brilliant person, right? You know your stuff, right? And you're moving up and you're building your business. Let's say you go from reselling to real estate, or let's say you built an Amazon empire, whatever it may be, right? So you've done pretty well for yourself. So there could be this illusion that you can handle any situation with anyone without proper, preparedness, whatever term you want to use. But you have to understand, there are individuals that you will work with that they know they're closing that deal with you and you don't even know it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think like going along, and maybe let me know if I'm understanding this correctly. I kind of feel like you're saying like it's easy for us to think that we're equal, which could actually be a detriment when we're dealing with others.
Correct.
But it might be more beneficial to kind of assume that other people are more experienced or more knowledgeable than you, because then that gets you more focused on what's happening. Right?
Yeah,
like these
correct.
people around me are, and he goes into the situation knowing that. Like he goes into the situation thinking these are really smart, brilliant people, and so he's nervous, but he's also like prepared, and he's thinking, okay, how will my experience test out? And I do think it's probably a good piece of advice is never assume you're the smartest person in the room. In fact, assume that everybody else is smarter than you are. Never assume that you're the most, the hardest worker, even if you are. But if you assume that, you might make yourself look like a fool. Right?
Well, and that's why he says the smartest dumb guy in the room.
Yep.
Right. And that's exactly it. Because here's what happens when you see yourself as the underdog. My experience has been I'm more careful in everything that I do. When I walk into a room, this has never happened, by the way. Okay, it has, but and you think you know more than everyone in that room, you end up, you can end up in a really bad place because you will automatically, people will figure it out really quick what you don't know and what you do know. Right. And so it's always wise to see yourself as, this is my experience, and this is what Voss is saying, is that he came in believing he knew what he was doing, but he didn't know all the logic and all the science and everything behind it. He just knew that his experience had taught him something. So he walked into that room, and that, I think, was his advantage, right? Where everybody else in that room, right, thought they knew better because they had gone to these top tier schools. They had done all the work. They had, and here comes Chris Voss, and he meets with this guy, Andy, right? Mm-hmm. And Andy, he says, what does he say here about Andy? He says, he and I went into an empty classroom overlooking one of those English-style squares on Harvard's campus, and we each used the tools we had. Andy would throw out an offer and give a rationally airtight explanation for why it was a good one, an inescapable logic track and a trap, and I'd answer with some variation of, how am I supposed to do that? Right? And before that, he says, my counterpart, he's talking about Andy again, was one of those guys who wear their intellectual superiority like they wear their khakis with relaxed confidence.
Yeah. So this guy knew his stuff,
but he had an air about it too.
Yeah. And so what set up this situation is the very first like interaction he has is this challenge. Okay. So one of you guys, one of you will be the person buying, one of you will be the person selling. You have a fixed price that you can't go below. Try and get as much money out of them. So it's basically just like a role playing of a business deal.
Yeah, closing a deal. Yeah.
And so in this interaction, this person is really smart, really wise, using all these logic traps. But going back to that first thing of asking the open-ended question, he just kept asking the same questions over and over to the point where it caused, I don't want to just say frustration because that doesn't sound good in business. You don't want to just frustrate the person you're negotiating with, but it makes them realize that they're not going to be able to move on you on that. Like they have to solve your problems for you, or if they want to close the deal. And so in this situation, he ends up getting the lowest price out of everybody in the room. Nobody else was able to negotiate a lower price, and everybody was stunned. And it happened multiple times, time and time again.
Anybody does say that. He says they get worn out answering and give me everything I want. Right. So he's no splitting the difference.
Yep. And he's being patient, right? He's taking his time, and he's not in a rush to get the deal, and he'll take the time it takes to get it, and it works out.
But it applies to, we talk about this at a very basic level, right? Even at garage sales, right? When you go in, we always say, be patient, don't give the first number, right? And then after that, ask questions, right? And the more questions you ask, eventually the person is like, you know what, I really don't want it. You're here. I'll give it to you for this price, right? I don't know. That's happened multiple times to you, right? It's happened multiple times to me, or even when I try to negotiate at places that normally you wouldn't negotiate. Whether it's a retail store, I've haggled at retail stores to get retail prices down, which is kind of weird. But I heard somebody do it one time, and I thought I'll try this out, and you get the no's probably 99% of the time, but there's always that one person, right? But you have to understand, you ask those questions and people, and we'll talk about mirroring a little bit, they get to a place, they're like, you know what? Why not?
Yeah. And I even think about this with interviews, right? Like when you're in an interview for a job, right? Asking these open-ended questions back to the interviewer is a good strategy, right? And saying things like, what, you even mentioned this to me at one point, like, is there anything that I've said that causes you to worry, right? About
Oh no, my number one question I always advise people that I've helped get jobs is your last question that you always ask is there anything in this interview that I wasn't clear enough about to cause you to hesitate in hiring me?
Yep. And I used that when I was in my interview for this most recent job, and it was nice that one of the person that was interviewing me said like, no, I think you articulated yourself really well. And right, like, so that's their last thought is them saying that, right? Like,
yeah, you're hired.
I've made them say that, you know? And so, things like that, or even, asking simple questions like, what is it that you love about working here, right? So then when you get them excited and they're talking, then they're going to associate those positive feelings that they're having with the interview they're having with you, right? So asking those questions is a really beneficial thing. And then going back to negotiating and what it looks like, he kind of talks about, this is just part of human nature. He says, even though we're not all animals, because he's talking about like, that this is kind of animal instinct. He says, but no matter how we dress up our negotiations in mathematical theories, we are always an animal, always acting and reflecting first and foremost from our deeply held, but mostly invisible and what is that word?
Oh, I'm trying to invisible. Oh, you know what? Just keep going. You're the English guy,
English
so
guy.
you don't know.
Incoherent fears.
I just read it in its context.
Perceptions and desires. Me too. I didn't even. I highlighted.
Do you want me to go to dictionary.com?
I'm gonna look it up right now.
No, anyways, I'll look it up. You share your point.
So yeah, I mean, this idea that we are all, that it's part of our nature, right? Like part of our nature is we've got these desires that we want, and so when you recognize that when you're trying to get something, the person you're negotiating with, there's something they want too, and so when you're both dealing with this back and forth. If you can understand what their basic needs are that they're looking for and what your needs are, then you can better find the way to meet your needs, meet their needs, and not necessarily split the difference, but get everything that you need.
Agreed. And the Wi-Fi is not working.
Oh, no.
Oh, it's okay. So, but I think what it means is innate, right? We have these fears. If you read in its context, those of you that are reading along with the book, we don't want to bore you guys at that point. But here's the deal. It relates also to later on, because here's the other thing. We're not robots, right? And so what what Voss does here is that he's very clear that similar to animals, all humans, is that we don't function in a very prescribed way. There are certain things that are, and that's why he's able to write a book and say, hey, this is how negotiation works. But he's also very clear that it doesn't work that way exactly every time, right? But before we talk about that, talk to us. What does the word inchoate mean?
All right. Inchoate, which means just begun and so not fully formed or developed. Rudimentary.
All right. So our rudimentary fears.
There we go.
Thank you, guys. We all learned. We also learned vocabulary on our pre-hustle podcast.
That's right. Yeah.
Even those of us that have had master's degrees.
Yeah. Well, and the real question
Isn't that sad?
The real question is, did we already really know that and we were just pretending like we didn't so that we could get some negotiating skills? Keep watching and find out.
Oh my goodness. I will say this. I want to give advice to our younger audience that is considering getting a master's. If you're going to get a master's, you're going to have to take this test called the GRE that is going to test your vocabulary intensively. If you're not reading books, that English part of the test will destroy you. So make sure you read a lot of books. That is my PSA for today.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, so going back to human nature, I like what he says. Later on in a few paragraphs, he says, but in the real world, negotiation is far too unpredictable and complex for that. You may have to do A, then D, and then maybe Q.
Yeah, and so basically saying you can't follow do A, B, C, D, and then you'll get X. but he's saying you might have to do A, B, and then switch to something else. And we talk about that a lot on the show, being willing to adapt, change, and not being set in a specific understanding. And when we realize, I love psychology. I think that there's so much we can learn about, the way the human mind works, and then we could use those things to our advantage. But then the other thing we realize is people aren't machines. And so just because something is logical doesn't mean it's going to always work out the way you think it is, because people have emotions and other things that get involved. And you have to learn how to deal with that. And especially when you're dealing with things like he's talking about, like he makes this comment, he says, after all, kidnappers are just businessmen trying to get the best price. Right?
Isn't that crazy? Wait, let's pause there. I read that and I go, he is so right.
Yeah.
It's hard to see that, but he is so right.
Yeah. And so these kidnappers, they're not logical. Like they're often deranged. They often have, crazy things going on. So you can't necessarily think that what applies to somebody with a traditional, normal, healthy brain with emotions and fitting into society a certain way, that a person who is, willing to kidnap and do all these other awful things, that all of those same things will apply. But what he's teaching in this book is that you can actually have a certain set of skills that you can use in different ways that will work for that person in the same way as a business person, because in the underlying thing is that they're still a businessman trying to get a price. There's still something they want. And if you can understand what it is the person you're negotiating with wants, now you have a position of power that you can use.
Yeah. So let me read the line that follows that one more time, because in order to fully understand and go, you know what, this book really relates to me, I think this is super important. When he says, what's the difference between bank robbers who took hostages and CEOs who use hardball tactics to drive down the price of $1 billion acquisition? And then your line, after all, kidnappers are just businessmen trying to get the best price. If you're able to understand that, this book will mean a whole lot more to you, right? Because it's very easy to get into a book like this and go, well, this doesn't really relate to me. But if you're able to equivocate bank robbers or CEOs, and some people might.
Well, if you're
in a good place.
If you've ever dealt with a 2-year-old, right? Like I realize that too. Like when you're negotiating with a kid and you want them to do something, you're at a place where, I've seen parents who will give their kid a lot of leeway and basically let the kid do whatever they want. But that isn't always the healthy thing for the kid, right? And so you have to give the kid the illusion, just like I talked in here, like an open-ended question, that they have the choices between things while ultimately steering them towards the thing that's best for them, right? So you're steering them, you're negotiating, you're getting what you want, which is my child needs to eat the food they need to eat so that they don't starve, or they need to go to bed so they can, or they need to take this medicine so they don't die, or whatever it is. And oftentimes kids will throw fits and you have to find a way to help a child move and make them think that they've come to that conclusion themselves, right? That they have some choice. And so
it's like Inception.
Yeah. Right. Like you're negotiating with a toddler is, I would imagine, in some ways like negotiating with a terrorist, right? Like these are like extreme emotions. Going crazy.
I think you can feel that way.
Yeah, for sure. But that's the point, is like, if you can understand how it works in the extremes, the all of those elements that are highlighted, all the skills that need to be refined and honed to their most extreme form, then can apply to the areas where it's not as extreme, but you see like, oh, I see what's happening here, right? Like this person needs to be talked to this way. This person wants this, and this is how I'm going to help make sure that we get there using this technique and this technique.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Now, here's the other thing, which I thought was super important. So then he gets into a little bit of like psychological studies, and it's pretty awesome reading the history. So, I've heard about some of these incidents. I was alive when the Koresh thing happened with, the Branch Davidians and, all that. And Ruby Ridge, I know about because I watched the movies and I go, you don't realize, I guess you don't realize how much goes into reflection in an organization like the FBI when bad things happen. You know that it does, but you don't really know.
Yeah.
Right. And so what I liked is he goes through this, kind of history, right? He titles it, "The FBI Gets Emotional." But this was super important for me to understand, because I will say, in another lifetime, I very much couldn't understand people that got emotional about things. I'm a very emotionally driven person, but I'm also able to shut it off like really quick. But still, it doesn't mean the emotion's gone, right? And he says that. He says, he's talking about different systems. System 1, right, is more of your emotions, right? And system 2 is your logic.
Yeah, and this is...
it's not him, but it's
Kahneman came up with an idea, a bestseller book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And those are the systems that come out of it. One of them is the quick reaction that you have through emotions. That's system 1. And then the second one is the more rational logic portion of that. And oftentimes it's that first one that kind of influences and informs what you're doing in the second one, which is the one that you should be making decisions in.
So that means pretty much all decisions have some kind of emotion.
Yeah. But that's, if you know that and you understand that, what's nice about that is like he makes the comment here. If you realize that if you can control somebody's emotional feelings or their thoughts about it, then you can control the way they think about it logically, right? So if you can attack that portion, of course, coming at somebody with logic and reason is important, but people are so focused on the way they feel about something that's a lot of times where you have to address first is their emotional feelings about it. If you can control that, then they will be open to a logical argument.
Oh, and I think now more than ever, it's more about how, you always hear it. Everyone says, well, this is how I feel about this. No one says, this is what I know about this. I mean, just think about the terms of vocabulary in our society, right? And this isn't anything. This could mean, we're not going to get into it, but this could mean in politics, this could mean in religion, this could mean in business, this could mean in sports. Generally, you don't hear people saying, this is what I know. You hear people saying, this is what I feel.
Yeah. Or at least you understand that that's where their argument is coming from.
But knowing that it's huge in every aspect of your life. And even when you're raising kids, I would say that's even bigger because even though they may say, I know, it's actually what they feel.
Yeah. And it might be something that they know, but even what you know, because when you look, and again, we're not going to talk about specific politics, but when you look at politics, typically you're looking at people who are seeing the exact same facts, right? The fact is the exact same, but the way those facts are interpreted are often determined by person's past experiences, their emotions on it, what their perceived outcomes could be under different situations. So it's not that like one side has facts and the other side doesn't have the facts, but it's what is done with those, right? And that's where it kind of comes in. And here it says that guy, Kahneman, proved the humans all suffer from cognitive bias that is unconscious and irrational. Brain processes that literally distort the way we see the world. And then there was one example of that. One of them is called the framing effect, which is depending on how you frame a question or something to that effect, a scenario, you're going to get different responses. So for instance, if you give somebody the opportunity of moving from 90% to 100%, there's a high probability certain that they'll do it. Whereas if you tell them they can move from 45 to 55, even though that's exactly the same amount of percentage growth, they're less likely to do it because it was framed of like, oh, well, it's still not great, right? Like if you could say you could get 10% extra, go from 90 to 100, that's great. But 45 to 55, it's like, So the way you frame, and that just goes to show, that's an example that how you frame a question or present something can lead somebody to react differently.
Oh, all the time. I mean, questions are powerful, but you have to hone those questions.
Yeah.
You can't just ask questions because, we've talked about this before, but again, you're trying to guide. You're not necessarily, you do the open-ended question, but you got to be careful. Now, I thought it was really interesting, the history breakdown, in the sense that, the next part, he talks about how, I didn't know this. So I'm thinking when I'm reading this part of the book, so when you guys...
I have one more real quick before you move
one more point. Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, I just wanted to mention too this...
I was going to talk about Chuck Norris for a moment. Okay.
We'll get to Chuck Norris. So going back though real quick before we move on from Kahneman, he made this comment, or another idea, which was loss aversion, which shows how people are statistically more likely to act to avert a loss than to achieve an equal amount of gain. Right? So just think about that too. Like people will act more if they think they're going to lose something than if they think they can gain that same amount. So if somebody's going to lose $10 versus gain $10, they're more likely to act if it's preventing the loss. And so just thinking, how can we use that in our negotiations? How can you use that when you're dealing with somebody?
But it's even entrepreneurial life. Yep. You know what I mean? That I think that separates those that level up or scale up in their reselling to those that don't, right? And again, I always say this, I always question whether I'm an entrepreneur, right? Because there's parts of me that would rather not lose that 10. And there's others that are entrepreneurs through and like, I'm going to throw everything I can to make that 20, right? And we both might end up at the same place, right? Which is kind of interesting. So it's just definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
So,
all right, Chuck Norris.
No, not Chuck Norris. Okay. So it's kind of interesting because one of the books I do want to read in our level up review is the book by Carnegie, How to
Win Friends.
Yeah, Win Friends and
People.
Yeah, there you go. That one. I can't even remember the name.
I think that's what it is. How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah, or something like. It's a very powerful book, and it's definitely a book we're going to be reading down the road. But the truths from that book are still true today.
Yeah.
Right? That was the early 1900s, and I would say most of the big time, business individuals will say that was one of the most influential books that they had.
Yeah.
Right? Have you read that book?
I want to say I started it at one point, but I ended up reading other stuff. So I don't think I've ever read it cover to cover. But it was one of those books that I know I've heard so much about, and I definitely want to read it at some point.
No, and that's the thing. So the reason I bring that up, let me get close to the mic here. The reason I bring that up is because sometimes I think we get the sense that everything is already set in stone, that there isn't anything new to be said about a topic. Right. And what I love what Voss does in this next part of the chapter is that he breaks down why what he's saying now is far better than was being said 50 years ago. Right. Because he talks about, it's kind of crazy. Like, I knew about these incidents, but I didn't know that they impacted negotiation techniques.
Right.
So he breaks down what happened. So he talks about like back in the day, before President Nixon, so in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, that was pretty much with kidnappings and terrorists. It was like knockdown, shootout,
yep.
Like no holds barred, right? Yeah. And if you've seen that movie Munich, it's a very tragic story, right? About all the individuals that were killed, and then there's another scenario about he talks about in Attica where 39 people are killed, and then he talks about that there was a situation, I think it was like in 1981. At an airport, and like all these people, there's a shootout again,
yeah.
and the FBI,
Waco
and then the FBI through all this is going, whoa, this is getting way out of hand. There has to be a better way of doing this, right? And hardly ever now. I mean, we have had a lot of shootings in the last few years, but you don't hear necessarily about airplanes getting high outside of 9/11. Post 9/11, you don't hear airplanes getting hijacked, negotiators showing up. I mean, obviously the news doesn't play everything out, right? But it's not the same. And I think he talks about that pretty much the FBI, after all these terrible tragedies, didn't 100% figure things out, but figured things out to a point that the loss is very minimal in comparison to what they deal with.
And that's a hard thing to do. Like, if that's your profession, if you've been in the FBI, if you've been in the military, if you're like me, a teacher, and you have a certain way of doing things, and all of a sudden that way gets questioned, right? Even if it doesn't always work, for as many times as it doesn't work, there's also going to be times where it does work. And it's like, well, I could try your new way, but like what I do works, And so for somebody like Chris Voss to be willing to say like, okay, step back, let's learn these new techniques. That's a hard thing to do. And sometimes people push back against that, but I think that says a lot that there was that adapting period and it worked, right? Like that says something. And so now what we're learning from this are techniques that are tried and proven. And the time that he spent and others spent from the FBI in the Harvard classes, and they're going through these classes, helped refine it even more, right? So it's grown from them. So they took what they knew, like street smarts, this works, and book smarts to like, how do we make this the best it can be? And so what we have now is probably the most polished version. And can it get better? Maybe it does get better over time and more negotiating. But yeah, it does seem like the level of negotiating skills has increased so much that as I'm reading through, other chapters, and it's like explaining ways you could talk to people, I'm like, holy cow, like that would totally work in like a situation with an upset parent, or that would totally work when I'm dealing with a person that I'm trying to buy something from, or
dealing with Rolando on the podcast.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. So we're laying down a lot of the groundwork. So we haven't gotten into the practical. I think we've talked about some practical things you can already apply. But here to me, and he says it himself, is the number one, I want to say is the number one takeaway from this book when he says, While the Ivy League taught math and economics, we became experts in empathy, and our way worked.
Mm.
Empathy. Like, I don't think about empathy when I think about the FBI.
Yeah.
I don't think about empathy when dealing with terrorists, right? I don't, now I understand it, right? Because, we've all, through the brilliance of Hollywood or whatever has portrayed this, we get that most negotiations now, there's a lot of understanding where a person came from and why they're doing what they're doing. And you're trying to make that human connection to get that individual, right, to not split the difference with you. But, he what does he call it on there?
Tactical empathy.
Tactical empathy.
Yeah, tactical empathy. And he mentions too, he says, by listening intensely, a negotiator demonstrates empathy and shows a sincere desire to better understand what the other side is experiencing. And he goes on to say, contrary to popular opinion, listening is not a passive activity. It is the most active thing you can do. And that's true, right? Like, I would say 99% of the time when I'm in a conversation with somebody, you are only partially listening. I mean, you're processing because you have a working memory. Like your working memory can hold things for a little while. So like everybody's experienced this where somebody says something and you're not really listening to them. You're doing something else. And then they say like, you're not even listening. What did I say? But you can actually repeat like the last few words that they said.
Yeah, but you're just thinking about the next thing you're going to say.
But so like your working memory will hold like a few words that somebody said, like a sentence or two. And so you can actually repeat back oftentimes what somebody said. But if they wouldn't have made you repeat that back then, within 30 seconds, you wouldn't have known what they said because it's only in a working memory. And so, yeah, when you're in a conversation with somebody, oftentimes you are stuck in this place of like, they said this, okay, I've got this point, I've got this point, I've got this point, and you're missing things. And it's hard because I can't tell you how many times, like, I hear somebody giving an argument and it's like, again, not trying to be proud here, but it's like, okay, I know for a fact that what you're saying is wrong and I could logically prove that. And like, there's these facts. But the moment you start thinking of all those things and all of the ways you can counter their argument, you stop listening and they know it, right? Like when you're talking to somebody and they're not giving you their full attention and they're not actually listening, you can feel that. And so that.
And I just, there's 94, we're on episode 94. There's 93 episodes before this that you can see Mike and I do that sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to say it, but
for sure.
There's moments that we disagree. And instead of listening to one another, we're already ready. In our mind, we're getting ready to just debunk what the other person says.
Well, and part of the
and you can notice it because there's this awkward pause as we're trying to regain our thoughts and go, okay, what did he just say?
Yeah.
Right. So anyways.
And I just did it right now, right? Because I was trying to jump in and interrupt you there.
Very possible. What a way to just demonstrate what Voss is talking about. But it happens. It happens a lot.
Yeah. And it's not just in an argument, right? Just right there, I think it was a good example. Like I did that. Like you're speaking, it made me think of something and I wanted to say that thing I was thinking and I didn't want to forget it, right? So I want to jump in and say it right that moment. And so it's not always, even when you're negotiating like in an argument, but just having a conversation with somebody, it's easy to be thinking about what you want to say next. And that was actually what I wanted to say. So I wanted to interrupt you to say that it's easy to interrupt people. That's meta right there.
No, that is meta, but it's so true. Listening is tough, especially when you always feel like you have a solution. It's really tough, but let's move on a little bit here. I like how he phrases this. He says the majority of the interactions we have at work and at home are negotiations that boil down to the expression of a simple animalistic urge, I want. Right? Everybody wants something, right? He says, I want you to accept that $1 million contract. I want you to pay $20,000 for that car. I want you to give me a 10% raise. I want you to go to sleep at 9 p.m. It's so true. I never even thought of it that way because basically I guess life is a constant battle of I wants.
It really is. It really is. Like, and part of that is it's so brilliant that when you're negotiating, this idea of tactical empathy, the reason why it's such a strategy is you are not giving up and conceding your I want, right? You are actually holding your I want as your number one primary goal. But in that process, you're not asserting that as your number one goal, but rather you're listening to them. You're listening to what they have to say. You're listening to their I want, and you're trying to find ways to move their I want to meet your I want, right? And that is brilliant, but it's hard because I think the pendulum could swing the other way where you just become passive. right? Where he says like listening is not a passive thing. You can't just simply say like, okay, I'm going to abdicate my role in this and I'm going to just let you do your thing. But to be a good negotiator, you actually don't give that, but you listen. And I think a lot of people do just want to be heard.
100%. I can't disagree on that. I was listening though, just to let you know. So there's a pause because I had nothing more to add. Okay. So talking about empathy, talking about I want to have one more. I have another thing to add, but it's on the next page.
Okay.
I didn't highlight what you highlighted.
Oh, I think this is a good one.
Okay.
Negotiation, as you'll learn it here, is nothing more than communication with results. I think that's a good definition of thinking about what negotiation is.
Mm-hmm.
It's just communication, but with results.
I agree. It's really, I don't know. I struggle trying to understand that. It is, right? I guess part of it is, I will admit the stuff that he talks about, it's going to take work. It's going to take mental work. So even thinking about that every communication I have, I want to walk out with the result. Like I already know that, but being even more intentional about it, it's not going to be easy the first few go rounds, right? It's going to take some time to get there. Right. And, I'll talk about my experience and how I changed as a leader, as an administrator, because it took some time for me to understand how inflections work. And it's interesting because a lot of the things, and I think a lot of you will relate, some of the things he talks about here, you've already done. You just didn't know how to express it into words. Right. Other things, you're like, you know what? If I knew that, I could have tweaked things a little more and been a little better off. Right. So anyways, that's what I want to share about that. Okay. So this brought something to mind. On the next page, he talks about people that negotiate the wrong way. He says negotiating does not mean browbeating or grinding someone down. And it brought to mind, I knew this individual that the only way this individual knew how to get things done was to browbeat, not not literally, but just verbally get in people's faces to get what they wanted. And with me too, and I'll talk about this later, but I'm a pit bull in a room. Like if I'm in a room and, there's somebody that's coming after me, I struggle, and he's going to talk about this later, about having that late night DJ voice. I just do, because I know I'm right. I'm going to make this right, and I'm going to win every single time. But what you learn over time is that attitude does not get you very far. It might get very far with those individuals that maybe are very used to having an authoritarian home, right? Where they yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, and so they move into another place and it's a yes sir mentality, and if you don't do it and that person lays into you, then it's easy to do the yes sir, like you have to go to. But I would say even right now, of all times, I very much disagree that gets anything done at all, right? And it's funny, I guess we have to bring up Gary Vee in every episode, but
this is your daily Gary Vee fix.
Well, he talked, there's this talk that he gives, and somebody had asked him, if you had a high performing individual who constantly performs, but he's a cancer to the culture of your workplace, what do you do? And he said, fire them. And I think me and you can kind of relate to this. we won't get into specifics, but it's 100% true, right? And if you are a person in leadership, and I'll say this because I've been in leadership, and there is that person that, hey, they may be closing deals, they may make things happen, but they're a complete jerk. Your other people that may bring in more than that one person can bring in an entire year will perform less because they see this cancer walking around, browbeating everybody, you get in everybody's face, and that's how they know how to do business. Where if you eliminated that individual from the workplace, you may find a lot more productivity happening from your other employees.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think too, though, a lot of times when you're negotiating, you're not always in the position. So some of our listeners are at that position where they're at the highest, where they can actually get rid of somebody. But more often than not, I feel like you have to deal with those type of people who, and sometimes they're at your level, they're a coworker, a colleague, or sometimes they're your boss or somebody who directly above you. And that makes it more difficult because then at that point, you then now have to figure out, how do I negotiate with this person? And one of the things he says is the first step to achieving a mastery of daily negotiation is to get over your aversion to negotiation. You don't need to like it. You just need to understand that it's how the world works. And I think that's important to realize is I think he puts it really bluntly, like you can be upset with it. You can think it's not fair, but the reality is the world is negotiating. It's if you want to interact and you want to get results, you are going to have to find a way to negotiate. And so if it's that pit bull or if it's that person who browbeats and puts people down, then you have to find a way to negotiate with that person. And maybe the person you're negotiating with is a pushover, but it's a different type of negotiating you have to do because you're actually not going to get results because they're not giving you the things you want because they roll over on something else. So how you deal with people is very different, but you have to realize you can't be averse to negotiating. A lot of people, I think myself included, my natural inclination is to avoid conflict. And so I tend to not push where I should push because I'm afraid I'm going to come off wrong or I'm going to upset somebody. But I feel like if I had the skills to push without feeling like I'm pushing, right? To push, but feel more like I'm leading or I'm coming alongside or I'm questioning, not out of a place of, because nobody likes that, right? Like when someone comes up to you and says, why are we doing it this way? But if you can question correctly and make it where it's like, man, I'm on board with like our end goal. Like, so how does this thing that we're doing actually get us there? Like, can you help me understand that? Then people are more willing to like have that conversation with you as opposed to simply, shutting you down and think that you are that cancer in the culture. Because you can be the cancer as the person who complains, but avoids negotiating. Like that happens all the time in break rooms, right? Where people just complain, and they're never willing to actually go to the boss and do the negotiating. But then they become a different type of cancer because all they do is complain, but they're so averse to negotiating that nothing gets done.
Agreed. 100% agreed. And then he says it. He says after the line that I read earlier, he says, it simply means playing the emotional game that human society is set up for. In this world, you get what you ask for. You just have to ask correctly. So claim your prerogative to ask for what you think is right.
It's good.
Right? So it's crazy because to me, when I think of this guy, like this is a guy I don't want to be alone in a room with. Like
you're afraid he'll like Chuck Norris you? Is
yeah,
that the Chuck Norris reference?
You know what I mean? Oh, what made me think about is he had mentioned in the book how there's this time in the US that there was constant hijackings, and I kept thinking of Delta Force.
Oh, okay.
So I totally lost my train of thought. But in case you're wondering where Chuck Norris is going to come in, you know what was weird about Delta Force? The first one? You never watched it?
Nope.
Okay, so I tried watching it with my son. Chuck Norris, like nothing happens for the first half hour. Like Chuck Norris is the face of Delta Force, but he's not Delta Force in the first 30 minutes. Anyways, thought that you know how we are. We're organic. We just like to throw out random things.
Yeah.
So if you can relate, let us know in the comments below.
Yeah, we're gonna get more comments to say, Mike, I can't believe you haven't seen Delta Force.
Or it's gonna be like, you guys are all over the place. That's my favorite one.
That's okay. We are sometimes.
I love our podcast. I'm good with it.
Yeah, me too.
All right. So remember what he says. So he says, remember, a hostage negotiator plays a unique role. He has to win.
Yep.
Right. And I love the way he puts that because it's not you're compromising. It's you're going to win, but it's not you're going to win by manhandling things or just, being, roughshod and just doing whatever you want. You're going to use empathy.
Yep. And right? I think this is where that title comes from of never split the difference. Because I think even when we talk a lot of times about negotiating, there's this, let them give a number, then you give a lowball number, knowing that you're going to potentially meet somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. Right. And the argument he makes here, and again, this is the extreme, right? Like when you're talking about negotiating for a VCR at a garage sale, it's very different than the lives of people. But he says, you can't say to a bank robber, okay, you've taken 4 hostages, let's split the difference, give me 2 and we'll call it a day. No, a successful hostage negotiator has to get everything he asks for without giving anything back of substance, and to do so in a way that leaves the adversaries feeling as if they have a great relationship. Right? Like that's crazy to think that like that is such an intense position to be in. And of course, like in our day-to-day life, we are not in that extreme, but that extreme highlights what is capable when you're dealing with negotiations is I want to get what I want, and I want to do it without actually having to give up anything substantial. And I want to do it in a way that leaves you feeling like we're still buddies, right?
Mhm.
Like that's the end goal. And Pure Hustle Podcast never, ever, ever advocates for like taking advantage of people. Our idea is
100%.
not like go rip people off, but it's to get the best deal for you. Because if you know in order to be profitable, you need to be buying something at this level, then that's the level you need to be able to purchase stuff at. And if people aren't willing to get there and they want to split the difference with you, that's in your profit margins, and that might not be feasible for you as a business. So you have to be thinking, what is it ultimately I need to do to take care of my family? And I'm going to get it, or I'm going to find somewhere else.
Agreed. And it's interesting you said that because you're talking, you brought up the fact that it's it's not applicable, right? But he goes in, well, you kind of said that. You didn't really, well, anyways, let me just read his line and it'll make sense. Or he eventually says, at a certain point, every negotiation gets down to the brass tacks. That is to old school haggling, right? So ultimately, yes, even the very basics of garage sale haggling still deals with what we're talking about, right? How many times have, you've experienced me doing this where I tap into the emotions when somebody has a super high price and I'll tell them, I go, it seems you're really attached to that item. It must mean a lot. And the person emotionally goes, no, I'm not really. Let's talk about, maybe I'm willing to sell it, right? And then eventually we go down that road and, then I bring in my emotion like, well, it'd be really great. I do this full time. I have a family, blah, blah. And then you make that connection. Boom, you got the deal.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Right.
Do you mind if I propose an idea on air here? So we're
live
just,
right now.
So we've laid the foundation here for this book. And I think so far I would say the challenge I would take out of this first chapter is listen, build empathy, listen. So you got open-ended questions. That's huge. And then the listening aspect. And I think just that, like trying to do that for the next couple of weeks is just thinking about like, okay, how can I listen to somebody's conversation without like wanting to interject or be thinking about my arguments? And will it work? Like, what do you have to lose? Especially if you're having a debate at, Thanksgiving at the dinner table with some other family member, right?
Can't believe it's almost Thanksgiving.
Yeah, no, it's crazy.
Black Friday.
Just think, right? Like, what do you have to lose? Like maybe you walk away and you didn't get to like say that, aha, gotcha moment, but just listen to their entire argument and see if that doesn't open up the door for you to either give your argument, or even if you don't get to give that one, if the ones you do give are received a little differently, right?
Or you just go, you might be right.
You might be right.
And just walk away.
Maybe.
And then that person has to really reflect on, am I really right? Like, why did that person say that? And just let it go.
Yep.
Just let it go. I mean, he talks about, that long, that patient game. And sometimes that's what it takes.
Yep. It's good. So I think that's a good challenge. And then what I was going to say is maybe for the rest of this episode, we just briefly, because at the end of chapter 1, it gives like a quick breakdown of what each chapter is, like a highlight of what the main skill or the idea that's in there. So maybe we just briefly talk about what those are so we know what's coming up, and then, take that challenge that we have.
Oh, okay. I hear you. There's a lot in here. There's a lot. We haven't mentioned any. Well, okay, before we do that though, we haven't even done this yet. If you haven't had a chance yet, and you are on social media and you haven't followed us, we are on Instagram, on Facebook, and TikTok as Pure Hustle Podcast. We are on Twitter as Pure Hustle Cast. You can also find us on YouTube. So if you're listening to the podcast and you want to see our lovely mugs, or you want to see what we're talking about, and actually coming soon, we'll be dropping some random videos here and there. You can follow us, Pure Hustle Podcast, on YouTube. Subscribe to us, hit that like button, get those notifications. And if you ever want to give us a call, you can always give us a call at 619-738-1170. 619-738-1170. And you know what would be awesome? If you shared some of the things from this book that you applied in your real life that worked. I'd love to hear that. I think that'd be awesome. To play on the air and go, hey, somebody calls and goes, you know what? I attempted this and this is what I got out of it. Now, we're not there yet, right? Because the real practical comes later on. But there's some things here. Maybe you got a job because your last question was, do you have any questions or anything that would get you to decide whether or not to hire me, or have I answered everything to your best? Yep. I didn't word that right.
Yeah.
Let me write that right. When they ask you, do you have any questions? Say, I was just wondering, is there anything else I need to clear up that would cause you to hesitate in hiring me for this position?
Yeah. Is there anything that I've said here that causes concern, or that makes you feel like I'm not a good fit for this company, right?
No, well, I wouldn't say.
No, that's good though, because then they say like, no, like you're a good fit for the company. Like if that's their thought, like can they articulate why you shouldn't be hired? And if they can't, and they mention like, no, you everything you said was great, and they leave off on a good.
Disclaimer: I did learn this from somebody else, so it wasn't Orlando's original idea. All right. Hey, and outside of that, you can also email us at purehustlepodcast@gmail.com. That's purehustlepodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to say thank you in a monetary way, there's a link below. Thank you so much for the donations that came in this past week. We are always shocked and surprised when things come in. So thank you so much. It definitely helps us. And as always, reviews are very powerful. We're almost at 200. Our hope was that by the next theme episode, we'd be at 200, and I think we're like 20 something away. Last I checked, we were like at 178 or something like that. So anyways, write up a review or just 5 stars. That would be awesome. So let's wrap things up here then.
Yeah, and like I was saying, that it gives us a nice little breakdown and kind of a teaser of each chapter. Okay. And like I said, this so far, this first chapter, even though it wasn't like a lot of practical, there was practical, right? Like listen actively, open-ended questions, and kind of figuring out how that works in your life and how you can use that. So going into chapter 2, it says in chapter 2, you'll learn how to avoid the assumptions that blind neophyte negotiators and replace them with active listening techniques like mirroring, silences, and the late night FM DJ voice.
You're tuning in to Pure Hustle Podcast After Dark.
Yeah. So you're going to go ahead and leave us a review, 5-star review on iTunes. That would be great. That's kind of the...
You sounded like something else though. It didn't sound late night DJ. It was almost late night DJ. But maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know. What is the late night
Does
DJ
it depend on your station?
Maybe it does.
Like, is there a difference between a hip hop and a country station late night DJ?
Yeah. Late night DJ is kind of like the calm, like just authoritative, like you're listening to blah, blah, blah. Thank you for calling in. So today we're going to be talking about, and it's kind of just like, don't you think? Like, what is your idea of a late night DJ?
No, yeah. Like smooth, like... You're listening to the sound of Pure Hustle Podcast.
That's right. I was trying to accomplish that with my, go ahead and leave us a review. 5-star review on iTunes would be great. We appreciate it. And, I don't know if I'm very good at the late night DJ.
Would you be willing to leave a 5-star review? What do you think about that?
But part of the DJ voice is to not actually ask a question, but to say it. Like,
no, I get it. But now I do better. He talks about another voice about the playful, positive.
That's your go-to.
That is my go-to. That
should be everybody's go-to.
That is the podcast. That's how I roll pretty much all the time. But anyways, all right. So yeah, no, chapter 2 is really good because even the mirroring part, like it's you'll learn about how to be assertive, but yet you're still like you're not giving, but you're negotiating.
Yep.
Right? So that's kind of tough. Now,
tell us about chapter 3. What is chapter 3 going to be about?
I think tactical empathy.
Yep.
Right? And so anyways, he goes, the key thing is in understanding that you're weaponizing all these different tools. I think it's so good to understand that at face value, things can be used for a lot more than what you initially see them, right? And that's what I'm seeing, what he's talking about here.
Yeah, so chapter 3 says we'll delve into tactical empathy. You'll learn how to recognize your counterpart's perspective and then gain trust and understanding through labeling. That is by repeating perspectives back to them. I think that's good.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward. So are we let's try to hit 2 chapters our next Pure podcast.
Yeah, of course.
We can do it. No, I know. We're laying down the groundwork. There was a lot of groundwork, and hopefully this, if you didn't pick up the book, this motivated you. You don't even have to use our affiliate link below. Just get the book. Go to the library. Somebody actually in the last Level Up review dropped a tip about how to get books for free from the library, which you can do that anyways, but there's another way to get it. So I just really want to encourage you to pick up this book. I think it's such a great tool. Now,
are we going to like break down? I was envisioning us just to quickly give like that sentence of each chapter. Like that way we give a teaser, like what they can expect this book. So that way they want to go get it.
Okay. Do it.
All right. That's what yeah. All right.
That's a good negotiation, Mike.
Yeah. Chapter 4. Chapter 4, I'll explain ways to make your counterpart feel understood and positively affirmed in negotiating in order to create an atmosphere of unconditional positive regard. It's a good one. Chapter 5.
Oh, you want me to read these?
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay. I'm a little... I want you guys to read it. I want the audience to read it. Like, get that? I'm more, okay, all right, fine. I just don't want to. Here's the thing. How many of you can relate to the teacher that reads the PowerPoint in class? How many of you? Leave in the comments below, right? You ever had that teacher?
Yeah.
That they put a PowerPoint, they just read the PowerPoint. So I don't want to do that on this podcast.
Yeah, but I'm not thinking like, I'm not reading. I've just given like the 1-sentence summary of what each chapter was about, so people would know like what we're going to be talking about.
All right. So chapter 5, basically the flip side of getting yes. You'll learn why it's vitally important to get it to know, because no starts a negotiation. That's pretty interesting.
It's good. Yeah.
Right. Because how do you get to know? And no seems like it would shut things down. I'm interested in that chapter.
Yeah, that'll be
I think
good.
That's good.
Chapter 6, you'll discover the art of bending reality.
It's even more next level.
That's intense.
That is intense. All right. And so chapter 7, he talks about calibrated questions, which to me is kind of cool because it's basically, he gives you a set of questions, right? So again, I always say this, like this book is going to be something that you might, at the beginning, you might say, oh, this is really easy. But if you actually try to put things into action, it's going to take some work. It's going to take some hustle, pure hustle.
That's good. Chapter 8 demonstrates further how to use those calibrated questions to guard against failures in the implementation of the phrase, yes. I like it.
And this other stuff gets even more, I think he gets more technical as the book moves on.
Yep. Chapter 9 says offers a step-by-step progress for effective bargaining, from how to prepare to dodge an aggressive counterpart and how to go on the offensive.
And it's called the Ackerman system.
I like it.
All right. Anyways, and then chapter 10 is the Black Swan. So you'll just have to tune in and figure out what that means. All right. So, hey, but you know what I love about this book? What you'll enjoy about this book is that he's very good at storytelling, right? So it's not like, hey, this is how you do A and B and C. It's like, hey, here's a story. Here's what happened. Let's break down this story. And here's the practical parts of it. I think that is genius, right? Even this first chapter, you talked about in the very beginning of the podcast, how that grips you, right? Because what'd you call it in literary terms?
In media res.
Immediate rest?
In media res.
In media res.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Means like in the middle of action.
In the middle of action. So he does a great job, and he does that throughout the book, right? And so I encourage you, like, you're going to relate to some of this stuff, and maybe you'll be able to put your own kind of, you'll be able to place this individual in this chair over here and this scenario over here, where, you'll think about, hey, there was this situation exactly like this that, you know what, I possibly could have walked away not splitting the difference. And so now I'll make sure from this point forward to go through this. So he's very big on, talking about that conflict, right? He says this in the end of page 21. It is what makes conflict potentially meaningful and productive for all parties, right? And he's referring to that negotiation is the heart of collaboration. Right. It's interesting because he doesn't use the word that negotiation is at the heart of winning. Right. He says negotiation is at the heart of collaboration. And actually, if you watch some of his videos, I watched some this past week in preparation to read the book. By the way, I strongly advise, if you ever are going to pick up a book, know what the author is about before you ever read a book. Because understanding context means a whole lot more when you read a book. That's the humanities teacher in me coming through, but it's very big. So anything else you wanted to add here?
Nope. I think that just about covers it.
You're good. So, hey, let's give 3 takeaways before we walk away. What are the 3 things you said we should implement this next go around before the next book?
Open-ended questions, utilizing open-ended questions when you're dealing with somebody, as opposed to just giving a simple yes or no, kind of those guided questions. And then listening, right? So actively listen to what somebody is saying instead of thinking about your point, what you want to make, and see how, if that changes the interactions, if once a person feels heard, if that allows you to have more leeway in giving your explanations, or maybe move them closer towards your side, or maybe even you move towards their side if you've actually listened and maybe they had points that you hadn't considered before. And what about you? Do you have anything to add?
I'm just going to read the last paragraph.
Do it.
Actually, last 2.
Okay, so he's gonna read the slideshow now.
I am, because it's so powerful. I know. I just contradicted myself. It's all good. You might be right. All right. I've always thought of myself as just a regular guy, hardworking and willing to learn. Yes, but not particularly talented. And maybe that's you, right? I feel like that all the time. And I've always felt that life holds amazing possibilities. In my much younger days, I just didn't know how to unlock those possibilities. I'm 40 and I still feel that way. That's not him. That's Orlando's voice in the book. But with the skills I've learned, I found myself doing extraordinary things and watching the people I've taught achieve truly life-changing results. When I use what I've learned over the last 30 years, I know I actually have the power to change the course of where my life is going to help others do that as well. 30 years ago, while I felt like that could be done, I didn't know how. Now I do. Here's how. And with that being said, make sure to be real,
be relevant,
and be reselling.
Peace.